I'm going to walk you through how to answer and prepare for behavioral questions during product manager interviews. My name is Alex. I used to be a Google Group product manager, and I started the Product Career Accelerator, where we help product managers that are experienced and proactive get into their next high-paid, top-tech product manager role. Today, we're talking about behavioral interviews, which is a common type of interview that you can expect to find basically at any company in tech nowadays. We're going to talk about what exactly they are. We're going to talk about where you're likely to see these type of questions, why are they used, and examples. We're going to go through a few examples of what you're likely to get in lots of different situations. My recommended answer, there's a lot of different ways you can answer these, and this is one I've iterated over hundreds and hundreds of different people and situations. And we will talk about how interviewers actually evaluate your response, how they make their decisions to hire or not to hire, common mistakes that I've seen from hundreds and thousands of other product managers, and the preparation process that I recommend, preparing for different types of companies and stages, and your next steps. So that's the plan for today. Let's get into it. First of all, what are behavioral interviews? Commonly, these are situations where you're asked to tell me about a time when you X, or it could be hypothetical. How would you handle situation Y? These are usually quite short in length, so you don't expect this to take the entire 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes of the interview. Usually 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Sometimes they can go on, but most of the time it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of behavioral questions in a span of one interview, depending on how many different topics you need to hit. Usually these will map to some company values, and we'll talk more about how most companies think about them, but primarily that's what these questions are. Almost always they're going to be asking you to either say about how you think about a certain thing, about working together, or how you've done it in the past. And we'll give examples of these. Where can you see these behavioral interviews? Certain companies, such as Amazon, you're going to see them throughout your interview process. So at Amazon, for instance, they're almost exclusively behavioral questions. You might get asked 20 or 25 or 30 different behavioral questions during an entire Amazon interview loop for product managers, of course. Walmart, you're going to get heavily behavioral questions. Startups, you're going to get often heavily behavioral, often because they don't have a well-structured interview process, so they kind of fall back on the behavioral one. Say, tell me about yourself, or how have you done this, or tell me about a project that you've run. So you'll see them more often in these environments. But really, any tech company, you're almost guaranteed to have some behavioral questions in there. Even companies like Google or Facebook, certainly they have heavily aspect of product design that I'm sure you're used to, and analytical and making trade-off decisions and showing how you think about certain things. They're going to still sneak in some questions about how you worked with a team or how you got through conflict or something like that. So you're bound to get these questions there as well. Why are these behavioral interviews used so frequently? Effectively, the interviewers are trying to figure out what it would actually be like to work with you. That's it in a nutshell. They have not worked with you in the past. They want to figure out what it would be like to work with you. How do you deal with challenges? How do you work with others? How do you deal with successes? How do you execute? What are important values for you? What do you consider important in your work? And ultimately, are you the type of person they want to work with? They want to check the kind of the culture match their values. Most companies, mid-size and above, have some sort of set of values that they believe in and that most team members share. And they're trying to preserve this culture because it helps them actually build the things that they're building. So very often, they're just going to check you against the values that they've already set up in the company. And finally, they want to understand, have you done what you've said in your resume or in your answers you've done? They want to actually fact check and see if they can dive a little bit deeper and understand whether you're kind of bending the truth or not. Let's go over some examples of these questions so that you and I can be on the same page. Most common one that I'm sure you've heard is to tell me about yourself. Maybe it doesn't feel like a behavioral question, but it is, because you're the one who puts together the story. You choose what you talk about, and you choose how you talk about it. So tell me about yourself is probably the most common. That's why I put it position 0. Tell me about a time about when you've led a product or project. Tell me about a time you had to influence others. Critical one. Tell me about a time that you failed. What failure you choose. Do you have a failure? If you don't, then maybe you haven't tried enough. But if you do, maybe you picked too critical of a failure. So these things are all important elements to think about. Tell me about your greatest success. What do you consider successful? What will you pick? How impactful is it? Tell me about a product that you're proud of. Another way of looking at the similar situation. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a team member. Conflict is huge. It comes up all the time. Disagreement with your engineering partner. How do you work with engineers, right, as a product manager? Tell me about a time you had an underperforming teammate. How do you work with others in a team where they may not be performing? They may not be performing for different reasons. What do you do in these situations? Tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager. So this is another thing. How do you deal with authority? Do you continue to do the right thing or not? And there's obviously a lot of nuance to it, and we'll go over how I think about answering these, and I'm going to share that with you. But for now, convincing someone of your viewpoint, a significant challenge, so struggles that you faced, and mistakes that you've made. These are all very common questions. And inside the Product Career Accelerator, we have probably the first top 50 questions that you're likely to get in all environments. And these are just a few examples of the ones that we see time and time again. All right, let's get into my actual recommended answer approach. I'm sure you've heard of this STAR methodology, situation, task, action, result, if I remember correctly. That you might have heard of SAIL methodology, which I've talked about last year and over the last maybe 2-3 years, which is situation, action, impact, learnings. I don't have a fancy acronym for these five. Haven't been able to figure it out. But over the last year, as we've worked with hundreds of PCA, Product Career Accelerator members, I formulated this latest approach to answering. It's my favorite one, and I believe it hits all of the things that we need to hit in order to check the boxes on the actual interviewer's rubric. And here's my recommended approach. You got the hook and promise. You've got principles. How do you think about things? Actions, what you did. Impact, what happened. Learnings, what you took away. That's the structure. Most good answers will have elements in all five of these. Let's go over in more detail. First, hook. What do I want from the hook? I want you to make it exciting. I want you to make it interesting. Think about it as a tagline. Think about it as the thumbnail on the YouTube video. Think about it as the first line in the LinkedIn post. It's the hook. Get the interviewer interested. And the second thing I want you to do with that opener is a promise that you're going to answer the question. One of the common things that happens when you're asked a question, hey, tell me about a time that you had a conflict, is that the candidate will not actually give a story about a conflict. So they won't actually answer the question. And it's so common that I had to create this as our very first part in this answer is the hook and promise. Let me tell you about a time that I had a conflict with this team member and it led almost to the downfall of the company. We got the promise that I'm going to answer the question, and we've got hook that makes it exciting. So that's the first one. By the way, don't worry if you don't nail these 5 ingredients on your first attempt. This takes a long time to perfect, but it's certainly worth it. I mean, this is the way that you actually get through these interviews is practice, practice. The second element is the principles part. Principles could be your general thoughts about a topic before you dig in and share the story that actually happened. You're giving a little bit more context on how you think about these things. What is your approach to these types of situations? Do you have a high level set of ideas or principles that you think about before you dive into the answer? Maybe foreshadows a little bit about how your thinking evolved as the situation went on and resolved. So if you're asked, for instance, about a conflict, you might share a few words about how you think about conflict, how you think about conflict management, and then you dig into the story itself. It allows you to raise yourself a little bit above the level of where the topic's being discussed and show that you are able to approach it holistically and to have an approach, to have a kind of a structured and principled approach as opposed to just, by the seat of your pants. Third element is the actual action. Now we're back to the meat of the thing. What did you do? Why did you do it? Shortest part of the shortest context, if it's necessary at all. Don't spend a lot of time setting the context, because a lot of times my rule of thumb here is if you can remove an element of your story and it doesn't really detract from the story, it doesn't make it worse in any way, you should remove it, because brevity is going to be important, as we'll find out. So just focus on what you actually did. Try to distinguish between your actions versus your team's actions. This is the we versus I distinction, very important. Then, when you cover that, we move on to the impact. Pretty straightforward. What happened? What were the results of the actions? What was the outcome? Hopefully the impact, why this matters, and why this kind of ties the story together. Why is this meaningful? Why are you sharing this? Hopefully it answers the actual question at the beginning. And finally, though, the learnings element really ties it back to your path of perhaps this is what led you to develop these principles. Perhaps this is what led you to improve these principles. What else did you learn from them? So it allows you to give a little more context around the story, as opposed to it being, here's what happened, here's what I did, here's what happened. That's fine. But if you then tie it in with some learnings that are actually holistically and make sense with the context of the story and align with your principles and the way that you thought about it, or perhaps even share about how you deal with things now, that clearly shows how you learned from that story and change the way that you work slightly to improve yourself. That could show how your principles evolve, how you address any potential deficiencies with your previous response, and just shows a lot of potential positive attributes about yourself. So that's how I like to tie up. Hook, very, very short. Principles, pretty short. Actions should be the meat. The impact should be a little bit shorter again, but sort of the 3 and 4 are really the heart of the story. And then learnings just ties it up. And throughout all of these areas, and especially the learnings, you are leaving these anchors and these potential for the interviewer to go down and ask you more questions about certain elements, certain details, but you're not necessarily going into those details. You're just showing that they're there and you can go into them if the interviewer wants. That allows you to kind of play both sides, still be brief, but explain all the things, or just mention all the things that you could talk about if given the opportunity. We'll talk more about these little nuances later. So that's the approach. Now, how do interviewers evaluate your response? So fundamentally, there is clarity, how clear you are with your answer in general. Do they understand what you're saying? Does it make sense? Structure. Is your approach structured? It doesn't mean that you have to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you have to have a flow and a structure, kind of what I did here. Here's what we're going to be talking about. Here are the things that are important. Here's how I think about it. Here's what happened. Here's the result. There's some structure, and you're leading us along a path of some kind. Brevity, which of course is a nice partner to clarity. The whole thing needs to be brief. And this is where you can, again, use those anchors to keep it brief, but then demonstrate that you are aware of certain other elements or certain other details that you could talk about if the interviewer wants to go there, but you're still keeping it brief to allow you to cover as much as necessary during the interview to give the interviewer signals. The interviewers then look for key signals, and this has to do with their internal company values or the things that they're looking for that job in particular. It could be certain competencies like your experiences, could be leadership, collaboration, problem solving, or it could be just straight mapping to their values. Execution, speed, customer first, obsession with the future, like whatever it is. Innovation. And of course, you can and should, in advance of your interview, go and look up those companies' values, because that's going to be a big key to the rubric of what the interviewer will be mapping your responses to. Let's get into some common mistakes. First one that I see all the time is too long. The answer is too long. If you go 7 minutes, if you go 10 minutes, if you go 15 minutes, you're not going to have time to cover enough of these stories to give the interviewer the confidence they need to give you a higher recommendation. Your answer should be concise, should be focused. Avoid the unnecessary details that dilute your core message. As I said before, if you can remove it, do remove it. Self-sabotage. Don't say stuff that could be used against you. This is where like you kind of score against yourself. Um, don't set yourself up. Don't do self-deprecation. Um, don't choose weaknesses or failures that are too strong, basically, and would require for the interviewer to just give you a red flag immediately. Frame your answers to highlight your strengths and the lessons learned, where even if there is some negative areas, because nothing is perfect, if you try to come off as someone who is completely perfect and flawless, of course, that's not realistic. We all have some weaknesses, some areas where we need to improve, but you need to tie it up with sort of a lesson learned. Common one that I do is for weaknesses. When you are giving a weakness or giving a failure, you don't want to pick such a critical one where they just cannot let you go forward. They cannot give you a higher assessment because it's so critical. You want it to be somewhere in the middle. And then at the end, when you're talking about your learnings, you say, and that's why since then, this area has been already largely alleviated because I have process 1, 2, and 3 in place. So you leave yourself a little bit room for growth, but show that a lot has already been accomplished. So you can kind of mitigate some of the potential negative stuff. This one has more to do with the fact that sometimes when I see, especially as you start using like these principles and thinking a little bit in higher levels, you will sometimes provide your principles, but then give examples of things that you did that then don't follow to your own principles. So you need this self-consistency, and that's a common mistake. Let's talk about the preparation process that I recommend. This is everybody in Product Career Accelerator goes through this, and I'm just going to share how we do this. So first, we have the story bank. Story bank is a prepared set of stories, usually like 5 to 7 to 10 different stories that talk about past experience that you've had in different jobs, hopefully more recent roles. You want to cover a lot of the key areas. We're going to go into them, but certainly leadership, decision making, failures, successes, execution, collaboration. And when you're thinking of these stories, I don't want you to necessarily think of them as an answer to a question, but think of them independently. Just think of interesting, impactful, exciting, powerful stories, memorable stories from your professional experience, and jot them down 5, 7, 10, as many as you can. Don't worry about them being in the format of an answer. Just have them jotted down in the format of recollection. What happened? Just the facts. What happened? What was interesting about it? What did you do? What was difficult? What was interesting? Jot all that down. The point is just to refresh your memory. And then when you have those stories, that story bank made, you can then answer questions a little bit easier. And then a lot of questions you can fit into a particular story. Let's talk about some of these key areas. These largely map to product manager roles and responsibilities. So collaboration and teamwork is a big one. That's working cross-functionally, very commonly with engineers and designers, but certainly marketing and sales as well. That means handling conflicts and disagreements. On the communication side of things, that means written, verbal, relaying information to different size teams and individuals, talking to leadership in a different way that you might be talking about your own team. Now, in execution or problem solving, sort of getting things done, getting people unblocked, overcoming obstacles, helping your team members and other teams get unblocked, creating structure to problems and identifying these issues. On leadership and influence, I think we did, it's a little bit different. It's motivation without direct authority, which usually a product manager is a team of a cross-functional team that they are an unofficial leader for. You could also have direct authority if you are a people manager. But setting goals, driving alignment on OKRs and other goal-setting mechanisms, metrics, all of these things, leadership and influence. How do we get organizations, people, and departments and companies to do what we need? Decision making could be a big one. Making trade-offs, choosing between different paths and why you're going down path A versus path B. Data driven, this is often, hey, how do you make decisions when you do have data? Or how do you make decisions when you don't have a lot of data? So, how do you act in ambiguity? How do you find your way? This is the balance between data and intuition. Your successes and failures and weaknesses and strengths you may want to think about. This is often comes up. Certain things like handling mistakes, demonstrating growth mindset come into play here. And of course, your product thinking and strategy itself. How do you think about product design, iteration, launching products, sunsetting products, right? Shutting them down, and then balancing short-term and long-term priorities for the product and the business. All right. Now, key element of this for you in terms of practice is, yes, you do need to write the stuff out, and that's usually the first step that we recommend. But eventually, very quickly, we want you to get to this practicing. You got to speak this stuff. And a lot of times we have sessions, we have workshops where we will practice speaking and listening and refining these stories, specifically in different environments, in one-on-one, in group, in asynchronous. But it's very important to actually do the reps and say these things. It's a little bit different from writing versus speaking. We will record, we will review, we will iterate, and kind of workshop your answers to improve them over time. Refining your stories usually involves, like I said, getting rid of the stuff that doesn't add to the story, and then paying attention to what we actually want our interviewer to say and take away. So inside the accelerator, we sometimes will do role playing where one person is the interviewer, another person is the candidate. And it's important for you to have the role of the candidate, of course, but also sometimes the role of the interviewer so that you understand, okay, as I'm listening to an answer, what am I writing down? Because I'm writing down eventually something that I'm going to use to make a decision on hire or no hire after. So how am I thinking about my rubric? How am I finding and jotting down the things that the candidate said and slotting it into the right place to make the decision later on? Finally, we're trying to get to this point of internalizing. We want to understand the story deeply. This is not memorization. We're not trying to just rehearse and then recite this stuff. We're trying to really internalize some of the learnings, some of the principles, and really get you to be a better product thinker. As with pretty much all interview preparation, this process will make you a better product manager and a better builder of products and a leader of teams. The goal is to have 5 to 10, more if you go in for like an Amazon or Walmart loop, and fewer if you're just doing a Google, a Meta, or somebody that's more product focused. But you want to have a bunch of these stories ready to go so that you're not thinking of them on the spot. You have time to actually put together a meaningful answer in just a few minutes because you're already familiar with these stories. All right, let's just talk about a few different environments in which you can be asked these behavioral questions. First one is recruiter screen. The name of the game here is to find out what the recruiter is looking for. What are the 3, 4, 5 elements that they think the hiring manager needs that you will need to demonstrate? Because the recruiter wants to pass you on. They don't want to give you a red flag, so don't give them one. You're just trying to not demonstrate any red flags. First, confirm that you are a potential solution to the problem, and then match what they're looking for, and then show breadth. And give them a reason to say yes, because they want to say yes. They are on your team, the recruiters, usually. Hiring managers are a little bit different. Here, you need to demonstrate breadth and depth. And of course, you need to actually show that you're a solution for the problem that they have, because this is the hiring manager. They have a problem. You need to be able to fix that problem, or at least have a big shot of fixing that problem. So in here, I would definitely understand the company, definitely understand the job description, make sure I understand what the problem that they have before I go to the interview. And then during the interview, you can actually ask questions to get a little bit more insight, to fill in so you have a more complete picture of what their problem is. Provide anchors for details as we go, which means that as you answer the question, you might say, hey, if we have time, we can also talk about this, or I'd love to explore that. When you're interviewing for individual contributor roles, of course, it's all about impact, impact, impact. What did you do? Why was it impactful for the customer, for the company? Why was it personally impactful? Not just sort of all the stuff that your team did, but what exactly did you do? And what would be different if you were not there, if you did not do those things? Values are extremely important here. You've got to match the company. Speed to match the company. If the company goes fast, then you should get ready to go fast, or at least demonstrate how you can do so. But for a people management track, it's a different thing, right? The focus on these behavioral questions are going to be almost entirely on team building and management. How did you hire? How did you build your teams? How did you do organizational planning? How did you mentor? How did you fire? How did you do all of this stuff on the management side of things? And of course, it's going to be more about vision, strategy, long-term planning, goal setting, alignment. All right. So here's what I want you to do. If you're actually going to be interviewing and undergoing behavioral interviews soon, then I recommend you start just like we start inside PCA. You draft 5 to 10 behavioral stories. Don't worry about answering the questions. Just write these stories for recollection purposes. Then start practicing them first written, then out loud, and then refine them for brevity. Make them shorter, shorter, shorter until you can get to 2, 3, 4 minutes per story. You can confidently deliver it. Get feedback from peers, from mentors and coaches, ideally calibrated coaches like inside PCA. And the goal is to internalize the stories until you can comfortably talk about them as if you're speaking with a colleague without a lot of anxiety about it. And of course, attend mock interview sessions to kind of polish your delivery and get better and better over time. All right, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned about behavioral questions. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments below. And if you'd like to partner up and potentially join the Product Career Accelerator, there's a link in the description. We can set up a call and see if we can help you land your next product management role. Thanks very much. See you next time.